Добрий день.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. We continue our operation. My name is Olga Atamanova, and I want to introduce our next speaker today is Sheikh Murat Suleymanov, the Mufti of the Religious Administration of Muslims of Ukraine, UMMA. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. It's been almost 9 years of the war, and tomorrow will be an anniversary of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor in our homeland. So we would like to talk to you about how this year was passed by the religious community, what were the challenges that you faced, and what are the steps that require solutions now. Thank you for these questions. The Muslims of Ukraine are an integral part of Ukrainian society. Just like everyone else, our community was affected by this war. Our people suffered. A lot of Muslims left their homes. And I'm saying specifically about those who resided in Kherson, the Muslims who lived in Kharkiv, in Zaporizhia, Dnipro. I remember, I'm personally from Lviv, and I remember the first day of the war, just as people were writing from the very morning, the people I never knew, they were looking for a new place to stay. And really, when you talk to people, when you felt their fear, and when they were leaving their homes, not only their homes, it was really very difficult. However, a large fraction of the Muslims, they did leave their homes, they changed their residences, and there are those who left abroad. The Muslims who left abroad, do you keep in touch with them? Do you maintain those ties, and how this communication is going on? Do you feel their sentiment? Are they planning to come back to Ukraine and get involved in the life of religious community? Sure, we are in touch with them. Some of those whom I know personally, they call me, and they are involved in volunteer activities. They help, they support any fundraising, any humanitarian aid dispatch. And those who left are mostly the families with many children, and we maintain ties with them. And for them, it's very important when we tell them how the things are in Ukraine. It's important to them because we know that when they see the information on the media, it's difficult. But when you are in Ukraine, and when you tell them how things are, and if you say everything's all right, they are happy. They know that it's really all right, and a lot of them really can't wait to get back home. Well, let's talk about the Muslims who were left in the temporarily occupied territories. We understand that some of the territories are occupied for more than 1 year. We understand that the occupation of Crimea 9 years ago resulted in such consequences, and a large fraction of Muslims were left there. What's going on with them? The Muslims of Kherson, Mariupol, probably Melitopol. What's the situation over there, and do you have an opportunity to help them probably, and to at least to maintain ties with the people there? We had an imam who lived in Kherson region. There was a community in Kherson region, and during annexation they were there. Obviously they were unable to leave, but when they realized that it's very difficult because at any time the Russians may come and kill them, they started looking for opportunities to leave the Kherson region because it was really very difficult for them to survive there. And a lot of those who remained there, I mean, there are Muslims who don't do anything, and they were told, if you keep calm, if you keep silent, you're not gonna get any repercussions. But sometimes it happens so that they may be arrested and tortured and made some horrible things too. And really there's a lot of Muslims who remain there, who remained in Donbass, for example, talking about Donbass. And back to Mariupol, there was a lot of Muslims there. In Novoalexeyevka, there was a lot of Crimean Tatars and Meshed Turkish living there, who are all Muslims. And when we hear, well, and they're afraid to tell you anything, they're afraid they may be hurt and killed right away. And we understand that it's difficult to them, and those who have opportunities, they try to leave the occupied territories, and those and there are those who don't have such an opportunity. They just endure and they wait for the liberation of Ukraine. Do you know of any crimes committed against Muslims left in the occupied territories? They're being beaten or they're being detained as prisoners for long time. Sometimes it frequently happens so that they threaten with death. The Russians say, if you don't help us, they will just kill you. They will we will kill your family, and so on. It's been a year that a very powerful institute of chaplains is being built in Ukraine. Do the representatives of Muslim community get involved in the creation of this institute, or do the representative of the Muslim community get involved in the warfare like volunteers? Yes, the Institute of the Chaplains, it's active since year 2015, and the Muslim community takes very active part in its building, and specifically in the front lines where there's a lot of Muslims. They are active participants of the battle operations, and it's important. Their role is very important. We understand what's the chaplain's job there, the spiritual support, and not only spiritual support, it's always necessary for the fighters in the front lines. I would like to pass the microphone to our colleagues, our journalists. Good afternoon, Valentina Ragnar, Ukrinform. Do you maintain ties? Do you maintain communication with the Muslims in Crimea? What can you say about the situation in Crimea? And what's your advice for the residents of Crimea in terms of illegal mobilization and illegal detentions with regard to the case of Hizbut al-Tahrir? Yes, we really maintain communication with the Muslims in Crimea because all of our many of our friends, relatives are there. We maintain ties with them. As to the mobilization, Crimean Tatars, they know exactly what to do. A lot of them leave, and there are also people who know what to do right on spot. If anybody comes to them in Crimea, everybody understands that the majority of Crimean Tatars are 90% at least are against this war, and they wait for the Ukrainian forces to come. And as to the arrests, please remind me the question. Yes, about the arrests. The arrests are still going on. There are always searches going on, but we understand what they do it for. They do it to frighten, to intimidate the Crimean Tatars, to have them change their stance. Talking about the international activities of yours, I think it's important now for any area of our everyday activity. Maybe the representatives of the religious communities have some diplomatic mission. What is the communication, for example, with Turkey or the countries where the Muslim communities are represented? To what extent do they understand what's really going on in Ukraine? How spread are Russian narratives and Russian misinformation there, and what's its influence on them? It's a very important question, because saying honestly, Russian propaganda is very powerful in the Muslim world. However, if we talk about the Muslims who live in Europe, they understand it quite well, or those living in Azerbaijan or Turkey, they know who's Russia and they know how to deal with this. But talking about the Muslim Africa, for example, or other countries where the Muslims reside in mass, within a long period, Russians were working on them, and they keep working very well. Now they say that we're Muslims, we are against them, they do evil to us. So it's important when we talk about this, when we communicate our position, when we make statements and we explain to the Muslims of the world or the organizations that get in touch with us what's really going on here, what's going on in Ukraine, really. And I remember I had an experience when in South Africa, our girls from Ministry of Foreign Affairs got in touch with them and they wanted to interview us. Well, it was a radio station which was headed by the Muslim, and they said they still don't understand what's going on in Ukraine, and as Muslims you may deliver that information to them. And you know, during our conversation they kept saying it's a crisis, and when I made a remark, it's no crisis, it's a war. Well, you may call it a crisis, but it's really a war. When we mentioned what was going on in Bucha, Irpin, and they said, yeah, we understand you now, and it's important to communicate our stance. And just like Muslims, and it's my direct duty as a Muslim, not only as the Ukrainian, to communicate all this information to them, because if we keep silent, it's a crime. So it's our responsibility. What else can we do in this front, in the information diplomatic front? What else can we do, in your opinion? How should we reinforce our stance to make it loud among all the Muslims? I think that now all the world understands, because when the full-scale invasion was starting, the mass media started working very well, and now the whole world understands what Russia does. I think that it's clear what should we do. We should divulge the information, the faithful information. We can decorate something, we can add something from us, but if we do it in a proper way, the result would be better, because as a believer, I understand when a person stands for truth, the God Almighty always helps them. So I always want to ask, I cannot help by asking, what guides our enemies, because there are Muslims among them, based on their religious positions. How do they find this inner force and justification to attack us? It's a very painful question to me, because we have a Quran, the holy book of the Muslims. It's one and only for all of the Muslims. There is no separate Quran for Crimeans, and another for Ukrainian Muslims, and yet another one for Russian Muslims. It's one and only book, and if they open it, they will see that what they do, they commit a very significant sin. And you know, when I was talking to a very wise person, I started justifying their actions like it's propaganda which was imposed of them during 20-30 years. This is why the Muslims were of Russia, they were thinking that they liberate us. And that wise man said, okay, let it be 100 years of propaganda, but there is a Quran, which was sent upon them more than 1,000 years ago, and it says don't kill, don't participate in tyranny, and it's there. And now they come to their neighbors and they kill people, and how they do it. So really, as a believer, we believe that there will be a judgment day and everybody will stand responsible for their sins. And the Muslims who consider themselves believers in Russia, if they support it, if they take part in this, they should ask themselves a very important question, whether they are really Muslims or not. Thank you very much for this conversation. I hope that all the enemies who attack us will be brought to liability. Dear colleagues, I'm reminding you, joining us was Sheikh Murat Suleymanov, Mufti of the Religious Administration of Muslims of Ukraine, UMMA. Thank you for joining our broadcast. We're preparing our schedule for tomorrow. Please follow our announcements, trust in our armed forces, and work together for our victory. And glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you.